We're unpacking a fascinating and honestly highly debated mathematical paradox that's been making some serious waves online. We're looking at a recent, widely circulated explainer that makes a very specific, bold claim that there is a stark, almost unexplainable gap between the global cost of raw materials and the retail price you end up paying at your local fuel pump. The source material presents a detailed, numbers-driven argument about international crude oil prices, domestic taxation, and even the literal chemical makeup of the fuel itself. As always, our goal here isn't to take a side, but to break down the exact data, the claims, and the logic presented in the source so you can understand exactly what's being argued. To make sense of these numbers, we've broken this down into 4 quick chapters: the price discrepancy, the tax timeline, global crises and costs, and finally, the ethanol equation. Let's get right into it. Chapter 1. The price discrepancy. Okay, let's dive into this. The creator wants us to look at a glaring paradox by comparing 2014 to today. Think back to 2014. International crude oil was sitting at $105 a barrel, and here at home, petrol cost about 72 rupees a liter. Now fast forward to today, crude oil has actually dropped down to $96 a barrel. But the final product? It shot right past the 100 rupee mark, hitting 112 rupees in Delhi and 111 in Mumbai. So the obvious question is, if the raw material is cheaper, why on earth is the final product so much more expensive? Well, to answer that, we really need to understand the relationship at play here. Crude oil is the core raw material. It's bought on the global market and refined to make the retail petrol we actually pump into our cars. The creator's whole argument hinges on this one direct link. Logically, if the cost of the raw material goes down, the cost of the manufactured product should follow suit, right? But the fact that they haven't, that's the exact anomaly we're exploring today. Moving on to Chapter 2, the tax timeline. The source maps out petrol pricing across 4 major global milestones. We've got the 2014 pre-election baseline, the massive 2020 COVID market crash, the 2022 crude spike during the Russia-Ukraine war, and the subsequent 2023 price drop. Tracing the tax changes across these specific events is exactly how the creator builds their case. And here is where the creator points the finger: a massive rise in excise duty. Back in 2014, the government excise duty on a single liter of petrol was just 9.48 rupees. But the analysis claims that as global crude prices fell after 2014, those savings, they just weren't passed on to you, the consumer. Instead, the government bumped up the excise duty by 11 rupees per liter, and then, peaking right after the COVID crash, that duty absolutely ballooned to 32 rupees a liter. The argument here is that this huge tax hike basically swallowed up any savings you would have otherwise seen at the pump. Chapter 3. Global Crises and Costs. 69%. Now that is a massive number. The analysis emphasizes that during those 2020 pandemic lockdowns, international crude oil went into an absolute freefall. It crashed by literally 69%. From a purely market-driven perspective, a crash like that should have triggered an enormous, noticeable discount for everyday people buying fuel. But according to the source material, that historic discount never actually reached the public. Instead of lowering retail prices to match that 69% drop, the original analysis points out that in May 2020, the government stepped in and increased the excise duty by another 10 rupees per liter. The claim being made here is that policy decisions actively intercepted this massive financial relief right before it could ever reach your wallet. Now, what's really interesting about this calculation is the alternate reality it presents. The creator crunches the numbers on a hypothetical scenario if taxes hadn't been increased during that 2020 crash. You could have been buying petrol for just 40 rupees a liter. Think about that. Contrast that with reality, where the excise duty was pushed so high that it accounted for 32 rupees of every single liter sold. The source then walks us through a 2-step sequence to demonstrate what they see as a glaring double standard in how these prices are adjusted. Step 1. In 2022, the Russia-Ukraine war causes international crude prices to spike. In response, the domestic retail price of petrol is promptly increased by 5.6 rupees per liter. Fair enough, right? But then, step 2, the very next year, in 2023, international crude oil prices fall back down. However, the explainer points out that domestic retail prices remained completely unchanged. They didn't budge. This leads to a very pointed conclusion by the original creator. To convey their exact sentiment, we're going to quote the source directly here. They say, "The burden falls on the public in difficult times, and the government takes the profits in good times." This really encapsulates the core thesis of their analysis. They're arguing that the pricing mechanism is fundamentally asymmetrical, that it's designed to instantly pass global cost increases onto you, but withhold the benefits when global costs actually decrease. Which brings us to our final section, Chapter 4, the ethanol equation. The creator points out what they call the cherry on top of this whole situation. They claim that the fuel the public is buying today, at full price, mind you, isn't actually 100% pure petrol. Instead, they state it's a blend. We're talking roughly 80% pure petrol, heavily mixed with 20% ethanol. The crucial thing to understand here is the underlying math. The wholesale price of ethanol is roughly 60 to 65 rupees per liter. That makes it about 20% cheaper than pure petrol. So logically, if you're diluting expensive petrol with a significantly cheaper liquid, it should lower the overall retail price for the consumer, right? But, as the creator emphasizes, the retail price at the pump has stubbornly stayed high. The mathematical benefit of this blending just isn't being passed on. This culminates in a very serious allegation. Because the public isn't seeing the savings from this cheaper 20% ethanol blend, the source asks, well, who exactly is getting the money? The creator explicitly labels this an ethanol scam. They claim in their analysis that the massive financial benefits of this blending policy are actually going to government ministers and their families rather than benefiting the public. Again, we are impartially reporting this to you exactly as the source presents it, just to explain the full unfiltered scope of their argument. And that brings us to the end of today's analysis. By mapping out the creator's data on crude prices, tracking the timeline of those excise duties, and looking at the raw math behind ethanol blending, we can really see the structure of their argument. It leaves us with a critical, overarching question to think about. How should the economic benefits of fluctuating global commodities and the use of cheaper alternatives like ethanol actually be balanced with the nation's taxation policies? Who ultimately owns the right to the savings when raw materials get cheaper? It's a massive, complex economic puzzle, and one that is absolutely worth understanding. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.